Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Well known throughout the customer leadership industry, Chad has been the chief community leader for Execs in the Know, one of the top executive customer advocacy groups on the planet. With a passion for customer success and a desire to share and develop best practices, Chad's conversations with industry leaders aim to give unfiltered, unplugged access to industry peers who are customer obsessed, just like you. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Now here's your host, Chad McDaniel.
Well, welcome, listeners, to another episode of Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel as we continue our Women in CX Leadership series. And, I've been so proud and so happy with this particular podcast series because not only we continue, I think, to celebrate all of the great things that the CX industry represents itself, but some of the incredible talent and just change management, I think the leadership that this industry represents. And today we've got another guest joining us for the series, and Lisa Stoner, the global head of support operations at Uber. Lisa, thank you so much for your time. I know you are very, very busy, and to get some of your time today for the audience is going to be so well appreciated, and a lot of people are going to want to hear from you. So I do appreciate your time. And what we should do, Lisa, is just to kind of set the stage, let's go ahead and have you introduce yourself. I'd love to hear a little bit about your role currently, what that means, a little bit about the background, and then we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. So as you mentioned, I'm Lisa Stoner. You're right, the global head of support operations for Uber. In my current role, I manage the solutioning, sourcing, selection, management, and strategy for Uber's external partner network. So today that represents roughly 25,000 people globally. Those people are the eyes, ears, voice, face of Uber, facing our customers, our couriers, our eaters, our riders, our drivers, our restaurants. So that's a global role. Super exciting, as you can imagine. You mentioned the amount of free time I have. It's not a lot. Uber's pretty fast paced. Also on my team, I have workforce management. We manage workforce as a global function for Uber too, with some responsibility both for the internal and externals. So we are organized regionally. So I've got a couple global people, someone who manages solutions and contracts, another woman who manages workforce, and then I have a regional leader for each of the 4 mega regions that you would expect. So US and Canada, Latin America, EMEA, and Asia Pac.
Amazing roles, and gosh darn it, I could just spend all this episode talking to you about the nuances and all the T's and C's inside of that incredible role, Lisa. But I'm a huge fan of you, Lisa, and continue the absolute pursuit of customer success that you're driving to. I know you've got an amazing career. Uber is the most recent kind of stop in that journey, but as you've been a great customer advocate, I've known of for many years now. Not to date you and I age-wise, but we've been around a bit, and you've had a great career. Just quickly, how it all started, and kind of fast track us to what you just shared with us.
Yeah, sure. So I have worked my whole life, as long as I can remember that I was allowed to work. So I've been, I think I was a babysitter when I was 12 years old, and 12 and 13. So I've had jobs that ranged from babysitting to restaurant jobs to working with, high school debaters, but always in some form of job that I would consider to have an element of service to them, service or coaching in every role I've ever had. Really specifically in this industry, after I moved from having jobs at restaurants and corporate jobs, like a director of training for a corporate chain, I married pretty young. I was 24, and my husband and I moved to Jacksonville, North Carolina, where there was an AT&T office. And so I got a job in a call center. It never occurred to me to work in a call center, but that was kind of the only game in town other than Walmart. And I was fortunate enough to be hired by AT&T American Transtech. And that company ultimately was spun off and became a part of Convergys. And I spent 20 years at Convergys in countless different assignments. And so, one wonderful thing about that was that because of the verticals and because of the number of, really marquee clients we had, I was able to have positions like being a site leader and leading a team of, 1,000 people, many of whom were military spouses. And there's, very unique challenges to that workforce. And that was an amazing experience for me. Maybe one of the most formative ones I had. I was able to have responsibility launching all of our first India operations. So I was, never been to India and, really lobbied for that position and received it, and spent several years launching programs in India. That was amazing. The reason I live in Atlanta today, I moved here during a point when Convergys was part of launching the original iPhone with Singular. And the code name was Project Acme at the time. That was the Singular code name for the original iPhone. That's why I live here. And so I just had a series of progressively senior and more complex roles within Convergys. And then after 20 years there, Chad, I had this epiphany about how I wanted to spend my time and what I wanted to do. And I'd had this phenomenal career I was really proud of, and also had really meaningful relationships because of that career. But the one relationship that I was the most concerned about was that with my son, who was a high school senior. And I just looked at him one day and just, where did the time go? And so I left Convergys after 20 years and spent 8 months off traveling around the world with my family and my kids, and doing everything I always wanted to do and just didn't have time or thought I would do when I retired. So I sort of took a mid-career early retirement. And it's funny, like you talked about what a great job this job at Uber is, and it is. It's 100% my dream job. I love everything about it. And it was my dream job before I had it, literally my dream job. I aspired to work at Uber. And on my last day at Convergys, I was having lunch with Andre Ayers, who is the CEO and a mentor and an important person in my career. And she asked me, what are you going to do at the end of this sabbatical you're taking? And I told her, I said, I'm going to go work for Uber. And she was like, oh, and I said, well, I mean, not really. I don't know. Like, but that's what I would like to do. I would like to go work for Uber. And I didn't know anyone who worked there, and I hadn't had any job interviews or anything. It just was an aspiration I was putting out there in the universe. And then when I came back, when I started to look for work again, 8 months later, one of the first people I sent an email to was Troy, who we had a mutual friend. And he answered me within about 10 or 15 minutes. And I went through a very quick process and got my dream job. So that's 20 some years in a nutshell.
Well, I tell you, Lisa, first of all, we're going to be following you at Uber and continue all the success. And I know the amount of great continued leadership and capability you'll be bringing within the brand and the organization. And when I hear the background you shared, I mean, there's no question there's a lot of great abilities and things we can pull on from learning from you, Lisa. So this is why I think you're so dynamic part of the sessions and the role today. And I love the fact of the life balance and the opportunity. And, we only get one of these lives, as we all know, and for you to be able to actually enable that and make that happen is dynamic. So thank you. All right. Well, we've got a few things I want to talk about. And now that we've set the stage, people fully understand the background and capability. Lisa, the view on leadership, and it can mean many different things to different people. But for you, respectfully, I'm going to start there. And really, when you think of leadership and as a female executive in our industry, what kind of comes to mind? What balances you? What do you look for? What's your philosophies?
Yeah, I sometimes find questions about your personal leadership style as being the most difficult ones to answer. I don't know how, but I think about my responsibility in my role, no matter what it is, to to always include the following. So I have a responsibility to, first and foremost, to have a level of authenticity, right? So meaning, when I go to work, I'm the same person I am when I'm at home or anyplace else, right? Same value system, same things are important, same priorities. And so like that's a responsibility. And so perhaps I should think about that as a component of leadership style, because it probably is, but authenticity is important. I think you have to have, as a leader, the other piece is you've got to be a phenomenal listener, particularly in a company like Uber, where, by definition, it is growing so fast and it is so global that every day for me, perhaps every hour, is an opportunity to learn. And so the combination of being a great listener, and not someone listening is very different than waiting to talk too, by the way. So I think there's listening is super important. And in having the curiosity around really wanting to learn. I was listening to an interview with Dara, who's the current CEO of Uber. And, one thing he was talking about is the importance of being willing to hear difficult news and being willing to hear things that you don't want to hear. I think that's a really important part of a leadership style that I try and cultivate. Again, particularly at Uber, where this is such a nascent business, and we move so fast and things change so rapidly that I've got to be willing to course correct and listen to advice from the field and around. And I think the other thing about a leadership style is you've got to be genuinely interested in the success of others. And I think if I think back to every success I've had has been a team success. I really have never had any success that I can truly call an individual achievement. But I've definitely had some individual failures. And so I think recognizing the importance of a great team and maximizing the talents of everyone on the team is the other thing that will make me successful in the future and has made me successful in the past.
Well stated. And again, that generally an interest in the success of others. I can't agree more with everything you've said. And by the way, for our listeners, you're listening to Lisa Stoner. She is the global head of support operations at Uber. And Lisa, I guess really, in your current role, you have such an ability to impact customer success within the brand. It ties into leadership also, but it ties into so many areas. And I think of this industry, the CX industry, you've always kind of been in this customer industry over the years. And I'm thinking of individuals that, as we celebrate this industry, that either are in it or maybe thinking of becoming involved in what we do in kind of our lives of customer engagement and support and all those things. What are some of if you had to say, these are the things that have helped you be successful in your career? Are there certain elements, not just in the leadership viewpoint, but maybe certain attributes or things that you have been able to do that has led to the successes you've had?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, you didn't explicitly ask this, but I'm kind of going to put a plug in anyway and say this. I think that if anyone is contemplating a career choice and thinking about being in some form of, customer experience or customer service at a global level, that it's a fantastic career choice. And no matter what happens with, technology, there will always be a need for people to design and think about human experiences and customer service. And, Chad, that almost every study that you read will show that service as a differentiator is only increasing in importance, not decreasing, as consumers make choices about how they spend their time and how they spend their money. Customer experience is a differentiator. In terms of what has helped me be successful, I think a lot of things. So number one, working hard, right? There's sort of no substitute for effort. No substitute for trying hard, for letting people see that you're trying hard. Hard work, no substitute for that. The other piece too, I think, is, and we talked about curiosity. So curiosity around other people and finding mentors who can kind of give you advice, pave the way. I talked about Andrea earlier as someone who was instrumental in my career, and she was before she was CEO, right? So she was a great leader and a great example. And so I think having people in front of me who sort of cleared the path and were genuinely interested in my development helped me. I think a willingness to, not just a willingness, but an interest in doing difficult and challenging things was really instrumental in my career. And I mentioned India earlier, right? So I had no experience in India. It was a mission critical thing for the company. There was a posting. I don't know that I was the logical choice given my utter lack of background in it. But the other thing was that it was new. There wasn't really outsourcing India yet, and just the fact that I was really excited about trying to do that helped get me the job, and then ultimately it was a very visible and successful assignment, right? And in some respects, really catapulted my career to the next level. I've sort of always found that if you take on things that no one else wants to do, that are challenging, or you volunteer for projects that are a complete disaster, where you're hated, where the company is hated, or the project is failing, I've just always felt like those were great opportunities, and there's sort of nowhere to go but up in those times.
So running to those challenges, not
yeah.
Yeah. You've got to work hard. I mean, that's just it's got to be a given. But it sounds like just a very intuitive and thought right, and just general interest in what you were doing and desire to achieve, and working with others along that path.
Yeah, it was funny, So I had I was sitting on a panel with Janelle, who at Uber, who is incredibly successful, and I really admire her greatly. And I would say that we've got some pretty opposite personal styles, right? I consider her to be, much more of a planner, much more of a process engineer. And there are people who have great career plans and sort of execute against that plan. That historically has not been me. but you can end up at the same place. It doesn't have to be, right? I think like my plan was work really hard, look for challenges, do a good job, and success will follow.
And you had alluded to, again, I know today's session is not necessarily in that topic, but, we live this world of, for the customer experience leader, the absolute evolution and change force that's taking place. I mean, I think back in the 10 years I've been running the community of execs in the know, and for our listeners, execs in the know it's a user committee like Lisa and many others that we do best practice sharing and insights and have real learnings from each other. And how much continues to change and has changed in the whole consumer engagement channel strategies, to the tools and emerging trends or technologies that are available through some of the automation. And I could kind of go down the list, and you're kind of living all of this real time, this historic change, I believe, that's taking place right before our eyes. It's a great time to be in this industry. At least I have no idea what 2020 or 2022 is going to look like. But at the same point, we're really riding this wave and just sort of buckling down together. I mean, for you, that has to be very inspiring too, but yes, very difficult and a little bit frightening. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is, right. And so you mentioned some of the technology changes, right? So there's been, many years people have talked about, self-service, right, and contact rates. And so that isn't new, but there's all of a sudden sort of I'll say a real escalation of technical capabilities, right? And so you're really seeing massive differences in contact rates at companies now. And then the one thing you didn't mention too is, BPO consolidation. So for people who are in the outsourcing community, there's been a lot of conversation around consolidation and how it was inevitable. But I'd say the pace was relatively measured for a while, but I mean, since I've joined Uber, which was just in January, I want to say if I was looking at our top 15 suppliers in the first 6 months I was there, 9 of those 15 had some kind of major, M&A activity or funding event, right? And so even like the names of these companies, these ones that are sort of very well known in the industry, many of them will not exist in their current form in the next several years. So the importance of, maintaining a very active network increases. The importance of staying very current on news and what's happening increases. So the kind of the curiosity element and the teaming element that we talked about earlier become much more important as people plan their future careers. And if I were younger and in a different place in my career too, I think I would focus not just on my technical capabilities, but also my language capabilities, because anybody, in this kind of global world who speaks multiple languages is significantly more marketable.
Absolutely. And, a good observation on the BPO consolidation and change. And, we've continued to run our outsourcing interest group, which is exactly everything around what's taking place in that sector and industry and insights and best practices. So that continues. But yeah, the multiple language element, I'm with you, Lisa. I was the same way. I guess it's never too late, but I really wish I had additional language capability on my own self. But that's interesting. You pull that out as a real front and center for future leadership.
And I guess it's very top of mind for me because I see so many people, Uber's such an international organization, and I see so many people that are not just bilingual, but really multilingual. And I really envy that. And so I'm definitely trying to get my children to focus there.
One of the things, Lisa, I want to make sure we get into the little bit of time we have left is that I think the audience learns a lot. I mean, they've learned a lot about you by just listening to some of the philosophies and the roles and the background and what you're doing. But you've made a lot of new friends, I'm sure, after the episodes here. But the what are the books or the things you're reading? I find it very inspirational to learn about leadership, like yourself, the kind of literature or books or things you read that has inspired you. And I think we can, we learn a lot by hearing and understanding what you read.
It's funny you should ask this question. So we just had a meeting. I had a meeting of my team internally, followed by a meeting of all of the BPO leaders. And we just got back from that. And Daniel Julian, who's the founder and CEO of Teleperformance, was a speaker at the internal meeting. And he said something that I really agree with, but he's the first business leader I've really ever heard articulate this the same way. So I was excited to finally have someone who agreed with me. So I do not read a lot of business books per se. I do occasionally if they're recommended to me. But I do a lot of reading of kind of, I'll say, a stranger in a strange land kind of books, or books that talk about somebody else's human experience, because I think that reading is one of the most critical ways, or the best way to really get empathy of a situation, because you are in someone else's thought process. So nonfiction books, one I just read was The End of Your Life book club, and it actually is sold in airports, but it's a story of a man his mother is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and so it has a terrible prognosis, as you know, and they form this relationship, but she had this amazing personal journey, and she was very interested in refugees. And so there's a lot of the book about her experience working with refugees, but every chapter in the book is the title of a different book that they read as part of when she's going through chemotherapy. They read together. And a book that I'm about to read, which I haven't yet read, is a book about children in war, and it's called The Bite of the Mango. But it's about a young girl living in a rural village in Sierra Leone who becomes the victim of a rebel attack. And this is nonfiction, by the way, but heavily armed rebel soldiers come, and during a period of just horrible violence, they cut off her hands, so that she can't vote for president. And then in the book that I was reading, not the Bite of the Mango, but the End of Your Life book club, she meets this woman and she speaks at an event and she learns about her. But I just find, that book I loved. There's an author named Peter Hessler, who is an American from St. Louis, who's written multiple books about living in China. I've been reading those recently, but I really like to read nonfiction books about places I haven't been that I'm likely to go, so I understand in a different way what those countries are like.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing that. And we'll make sure we include some of that in the show notes of the podcast episode. And I think speaks, Lisa, to your curiosity in life and just your conviction to life and your involvement. When I was listening to those books you were saying, it was like I'm writing notes down because I'm thinking, I need to read more stuff like that. I read a lot on the business side of it, but those sound like amazing stories that we all can take different pieces to. And it gives me some unique insight about you. And one last thing I just want to share for the listeners, Lisa, this continues to some of the things that you pay forward. Nothing to do in the CX industry per se, but there's another group that you've been very involved with that, again, I think kind of speaks to the way you view and are paying things forward. Can you share a little bit about that quickly?
Yeah, I think you're talking about CASA. So I'm in the state of Georgia. I'm in Forsyth County specifically. I'm a court-appointed special advocate for children. And in Georgia, there's a system where you don't have to be an attorney to be an officer of the court. There's a training you go through, but fundamentally, the purpose of the program is to assign every child who is in foster care or somehow in the court system. And typically they're in the court system through a failure of their parent or failure of the adults in their lives. That's not always the case, but generally. And an adult in the community is assigned to follow up on what the court has ordered, to make recommendations for the child. But ultimately, the job is to make recommendations that would be in the best interest of the child and to try and help keep the child safe. And safe can be emotionally safe or physically safe or many ways to define safety. But about a year before I took that sabbatical, maybe 2 years before, I went through the process and became certified and was, very active. I've moved to a different county in Georgia now, so I've got to figure out how to do this now in Fulton County. But, found it to be, really personally valuable for me.
Well, again, I think it speaks to the centered leadership and the individuals that you are, Lisa, and kudos to you, and continue with that. And I think the listeners will find that element of learning about you also very inspiring and enjoyable. And again, you've been listening to Lisa Stoner, Global Head of Support Operations at Uber. And the last thing here for us, I know it's a tough one, but is there a certain advice or inspiration or something you really want to leave this audience with from the point of today's podcast with you about leadership centered philosophy, the successes of your career and the industry itself with other women leadership in the CX industry? What would you want to leave this session with, Lisa? Any words of advice, inspiration?
I think so. One thing that's really top of mind for me right now, so I work with a lot of really, really impressive young women at Uber, and the average age at Uber is really low. And so it's very different than other places where I've worked. But I just, I see so many of them come to me with what I would call a version of impostor syndrome. Chad, I'm sure that's a phrase that I don't know if it's kind of, if everyone in the audience will, but, sort of like feeling that they're not good enough or always kind of questioning if they're qualified for this role or qualified for that role. And I see it much more skewed toward the young women I work with than the men. And I guess the one thing that I would say is like, God, I really wish that the women on my team and the people that I work with could see themselves like I see them. And I said that in this panel that I was in, and my teammate was giving me a hard time, but I'm like, no, I'm really serious. I just wish they could see themselves like I see them, because I come home and I say, oh my God, I just work with this incredible woman, and she's so smart and she's so capable, and she's got the greatest ideas. And then the very next day, that same person will come to me, questioning if they're qualified for this other role, or questioning if they did a good enough job on this, or kind of needing way more affirmation than I feel like they should for how great they are. And I just, I guess my one piece of wisdom would be like, try and see yourself through somebody else's lens. See yourself like I see you. Because I really feel like in my career, there are times where I vastly underestimated my contribution to the organization, and I let other people sort of pass me by. And that was more my fault than the fault of others for not being more confident earlier in my career.
Well said, and very inspirational. And I think that's all we need to say. That was fantastic, Lisa. And for everyone that listened today, I'd love you to rate the show. I mean, your feedback is important to me. You can subscribe to the Customer Driven podcast series with myself, Chad McDaniel, or you can visit our website at execsintheknow.com. And my last call to everyone is that you're not in this journey alone. We are a customer advocacy group here for your success, and we really want to continue to connect the learnings and the continued changes that will take place in our industry as we continue forward here. So I call it #GetInvolved. We're an advocacy group for the customer experience, customer management leadership. Lisa, I can't thank you enough for some of your time. I continue to be such a huge fan of you. I'm going to be watching you very, very closely as you continue your career track at Uber and in making all the significant continued changes and force impact that you represent. And for our audience, if you don't know Lisa Stoner, she is someone as a gem and someone to really get to know and keep track of her careers also. So on behalf of myself, Lisa, I can't say thank you enough, and I look forward to sharing this.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. It really makes a difference in helping others find the podcast. For more information on our customer experience community, please visit execsintheknow.com.